A 360 million rand state procurement indictment, broadcast live across a startled nation, was built on a profound legal falsehood. South Africa's National Police Commissioner stood abruptly suspended, publicly tarred with the damaging brush of systemic fraud, merely to satisfy a calculated political spectacle. Then, under the unrelenting questioning of Justice Mbuyiseli Madlanga, the prosecution's lead advocate faltered, confessing in open court that the co-accused status was manufactured without statutory justification. If legal process is weaponized for political theater, where does true justice reside? Stay with us. This is more than a headline. It is a hinge in history. If this story resonates, show your support with a like, a comment, or a subscription. It means more than numbers. It keeps the story alive. Welcome to South African Dynamics. For months, high-profile political figures such as Julius Malema weaponized these unproven allegations, bellowing demands for swift imprisonment before partisan crowds across the country. Yet, as the Judicial Commission unravels the official record, those furious speeches have shattered against hard legal truth, triggering an unprecedented reckoning for those who sought to turn the machinery of state into a partisan weapon. In July 2026, within the high-ceilinged hearing rooms of the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry, the delicate veneer of South Africa's prosecution authority was systematically dismantled. Sitting before the commission was Advocate Andrea Johnson, the head of the National Prosecuting Authority's Investigating Directorate Against Corruption. Facing her was Justice Mbuyiseli Madlanga, a jurist whose sharp questioning cut directly through months of political rhetoric and bureaucratic obfuscation. The inquiry was examining the procedural integrity of an indictment that had shaken the highest echelons of South Africa's security apparatus, the criminal charging and subsequent administrative removal of General Fanny Masemola, the National Police Commissioner of South Africa. At the center of this judicial storm lay a controversial healthcare services contract involving Medicare 24, valued at 360 million rand. The state's case had initially been presented to the public as a decisive blow against systemic criminality within the South African police service. However, as Justice Madlanga meticulously flipped through the official charge sheet, a far more troubling reality emerged. General Masemola had not been charged with taking a bribe, nor had he been accused of participating in any fraudulent conspiracy. His sole alleged offense fell under the statutory provisions of the Public Finance Management Act, specifically regarding executive oversight duties. Yet on the official indictment, his name was deliberately joined with high-profile co-accused persons, including the notorious figure Vusimuzi Kat Matlala, who faced overwhelming counts of racketeering, fraud, and severe corruption. The strategic implications of this legal joining were profound. By placing the National Police Commissioner side by side with figures accused of treasonous greed, the prosecution had effectively shaped public perception long before any trial could commence. Under rigorous cross-examination, Justice Madlanga pressed Advocate Johnson on the statutory justification for such a move. The Criminal Procedure Act under Sections 155 and 156 strictly governs the joinder of accused persons. It explicitly requires that evidence led against one party must be legally admissible against the other. Under relentless questioning, Advocate Johnson was forced to make a series of devastating admissions. No evidence of fraud or corruption was admissible against General Masemola, and his inclusion on the joint indictment was legally flawed from its very inception. This was not merely a clumsy administrative oversight by junior prosecutors. It represented a structural crisis at the very heart of state authority. When legal machinery is used to manufacture visual prejudice, it compromises the seat of power itself, reducing the solemn responsibility of constitutional governance to a weapon of political convenience. The public, bombarded by breaking media headlines, did not examine the intricate fine print of statutory contraventions. They saw only that the top police officer of the Republic was appearing in the criminal dock alongside individuals accused of raiding public coffers. The resulting optics achieved precisely what a lawful process should prevent: immediate public condemnation and forced removal from office without the burden of proving criminal guilt. Advocate Johnson attempted to defend the prosecution's rationale by arguing that the statutory charges arose from the same broad matrix of investigative facts. But lies built on legal paperwork soon crumble, and as Justice Madlanga pressed further the true objective behind this premature charge sheet began to reveal an even darker political motive. As the proceedings intensified, Justice Mbuyiseli Madlanga delivered what he himself described as a cruel example, a devastating hypothetical that completely shattered the state's legal foundation. Suppose every single co-accused charged with fraud and corruption were dead, Justice Madlanga posited to Advocate Andrea Johnson. If General Masemola stands alone, what would his charges under the Public Finance Management Act be additional to? The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. The word additional, as embedded in statutory joining provisions, requires a pre-existing primary offence. Without primary charges of fraud or corruption admissible against Masemola, the argument that his administrative charges were merely complementary collapsed entirely. Cornered by inescapable legal logic, Advocate Johnson offered a telling concession. "I have to agree with your reasoning, Sir Tata." With that single admission, the prosecution's central pillar disintegrated. Sections 155 and 156 of the Criminal Procedure Act were explicitly designed to protect accused individuals from being dragged into complex, prejudicial trials, where evidence against others might contaminate their own standing. Yet the National Prosecuting Authority had joined the country's top police officer to a high-profile corruption gallery anyway. When pressed on whether this maneuver was calculated to embarrass General Masemola and create a public impression of guilt, Advocate Johnson insisted there was no malicious intent attributing the flawed joinder to clumsy or incompetent prosecution drafting. But in the court of public opinion, the damage was already done. Before we reveal the next chapter, which is perhaps the most powerful assertion of sovereignty you will ever hear, I want to pause and speak directly to you. If this channel has moved you, if these stories are touching something deep in your spirit, then consider becoming a member. Not for exclusive content or perks, but because supporting this channel is directly supporting narratives that mainstream media refuses to tell. Every membership is a vote for South African Dynamics' mission. Every member becomes a co-creator of the revolution we are documenting. Join us. Stand with the principle that African wealth belongs to Africa. The revelation that the state's lead investigators had pushed forward a legally unsustainable indictment sent shockwaves through South Africa's political landscape. This was not an isolated error of legal interpretation. It was a demonstration of how statutory powers can be deployed to create devastating political realities. Not law, not justice, enforcement. The immediate consequence of the indictment was precisely what any political operator might have desired. General Masemola was placed on administrative leave, effectively neutralizing his command over the South African Police Service while the criminal process dragged on. Furthermore, the Commission exposed bizarre bail conditions imposed on co-accused officials, including prohibitions from entering any crime intelligence premises nationwide managed by investigators who lacked security clearances themselves. This level of institutional overreach highlighted a profound breakdown in checks and balances. Ordinary citizens watching the drama unfold on national television were not equipped to dissect section references. They saw only a disgraced police chief facing grave allegations. When state prosecutors admit in open court that a national police chief was lumped with corruption suspects merely for show, the ripple effect naturally reaches the political agitators who fueled the fire. When the dust settles in the halls of Parliament in Cape Town, the true weight of a political crisis is never measured in press conferences or parliamentary transcripts. It is measured in the fragile rhythm of daily life across 9 provinces. The immediate aftermath of this political earthquake sent shockwaves through South Africa's financial and social architecture. In Johannesburg, traders watched the South African rand fluctuate wildly against major foreign currencies, reflecting a deep international anxiety over the stability of the state. Investors paused key capital projects wary of an unpredictable political environment where fragile coalitions fracture under the lightest pressure. But beyond the trading floors among ordinary citizens, the consequences were far more immediate and punishing. For millions of families in Soweto, Khayelitsha, and Umlazi, high-level political maneuvering does not translate into food on the table or electricity in the home. South Africa continues to struggle under the heavy burden of severe youth unemployment, lingering economic stagnation, and persistent infrastructure failures. When political leaders turn inward to fight for their political survival, the machinery of governance comes to a grinding halt. Local municipalities lose their funding. Essential public services deteriorate further, and public trust in democratic institutions collapses to historic lows. The promise of 1994, once hailed as a global beacon of peaceful democratic transition, now confronts its most severe test of legitimacy since the end of apartheid. This systemic breakdown has created a profound political vacuum, a space rapidly filled by bold, uncompromising voices demanding radical structural change. It is within this volatile landscape that the Julius Malema political strategy has reshaped the entire national conversation, capitalizing on the deep-seated anger of a generation left behind by post-apartheid economic inequality. By directly challenging the ruling establishment and demanding the immediate redistribution of land and national wealth, radical opposition figures have forced traditional parties into a corner. The political center is no longer holding. Coalitions are forced to adapt or face total obsolescence as voters increasingly abandon historical loyalties in search of decisive, uncompromising action. This is not mere political drama. This is not temporary instability. This is a profound shift in the sovereign direction of a nation. As ordinary citizens watch their elected representatives clash over the very soul of the republic, a crucial question arises for observers across the globe. What happens to a constitutional democracy when the patience of its people finally runs out? We want to hear your perspective on this historic shift. Do you believe radical structural change is the only path forward for South Africa, or can traditional institutions still deliver real justice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Yet, as the domestic storm intensifies within the borders of South Africa, the consequences of this power struggle are not contained within the African continent. Thousands of miles away, foreign diplomats, international trade bodies, and global superpowers are watching every single move with growing apprehension. The balance of power in Pretoria has far-reaching implications for international trade, strategic minerals, and global diplomacy. But as Western allies prepare their response to South Africa's changing political tides, a critical question emerges. How will Washington and European capitals react when a key African partner begins to redefine its place on the global stage? When a nation of South Africa's stature staggers under internal political strain, the global diplomatic arena takes immediate notice. From Washington to Beijing and from Brussels to Moscow, foreign ministries and international intelligence analysts are watching the political recalibration in Pretoria with sharp attention. South Africa is not merely another emerging economy. It is the diplomatic cornerstone of the African continent, a key member of the expanding BRICS bloc, and a crucial voice demanding structural reform across global institutions. Consequently, any sudden realignment in Pretoria sends immediate ripples across international trade, energy security, and regional stability. For decades, Western powers viewed South Africa as an anchor of constitutional stability in sub-Saharan Africa. However, as domestic political fragmentation deepens, the traditional diplomatic playbook is rapidly deteriorating. In Washington, policymakers express growing concern over the evolving trajectory of South African foreign policy, particularly as Pretoria asserts an increasingly independent, non-aligned posture on the world stage. From taking bold legal actions at the International Court of Justice to expanding ties with non-Western economic alliances, South Africa has demonstrated a willingness to challenge established global hierarchies. This independent stance has drawn both sharp criticism from Western allies and strong praise across the global South, highlighting a profound divide in how sovereign authority is perceived. This geopolitical tension places South Africa at a monumental crossroads. Western diplomats quietly debate the potential use of economic levers, including critical trade agreements like the African Growth and Opportunity Act, to encourage alignment with traditional security frameworks. At the same time, rival global powers view Pretoria's strategic independence as a vital opportunity to deepen financial, technological, and infrastructure partnerships across Africa. The stakes extend far beyond immediate diplomatic negotiations. They touch upon the core question of whether a sovereign African nation can chart its own path without incurring punitive economic costs. As external pressures mount and international powers position themselves around the African continent, the ultimate trial remains inside the country itself. Global alliances may offer financial leverage or diplomatic cover, but they cannot resolve the fundamental crisis of domestic governance. The international community can only watch as South Africa prepares for its next decisive moment. But as foreign observers calculate their strategic interests, a far more pressing reality demands an answer. On the streets of Johannesburg and Cape Town, can a nation deeply divided against itself build a stable path forward, or is a far greater constitutional transformation now inevitable? South Africa now stands at a profound historical crossroads, more than 3 decades after the fall of institutional apartheid. The foundational promises of peace, prosperity, and non-racial democracy are undergoing an unprecedented examination. For years, the nation relied on the moral authority of its founding liberation movement to maintain national cohesion. Today, that political capital is exhausted. A new generation of South Africans, unencumbered by the political loyalties of the past, is demanding a fundamental revision of the national social contract. They recognize a stark, undeniable reality. Political rights without economic transformation remain an incomplete liberation. The path forward requires far more than temporary policy adjustments or superficial political compromises. It demands an unyielding commitment to structural reform, national sovereignty, and true economic dignity for every citizen. If the Republic is to avoid prolonged stagnation and deepening social fracture, its leadership must confront the root causes of systemic inequality. The true strength of South Africa has never resided solely within the marble corridors of parliamentary power in Cape Town. It lives in the remarkable resilience, creativity, and determination of its people. Across local communities, civil society networks, and vibrant youth movements, a new vision of governance is taking root, one driven not by historical party allegiance, but by an absolute insistence on justice and accountability. Yet the strategic choices made in the coming years will carry momentous consequences for the entire African continent. South Africa can either pioneer a bold model of economic restructuring that empowers its marginalized majority, or remain trapped in a cycle of political dysfunction and institutional decay. The risks are undeniably severe, but so too is the potential for national renewal. True sovereignty is not merely defended against external diplomatic pressure, it is constructed internally through robust institutions, transparent leadership, and the genuine empowerment of every citizen. The story of this resilient republic is far from over. In truth, its most decisive chapter is currently being written on the national stage. As political factions contend for power and the old consensus gives way to an unpredictable future, the nation prepares to navigate its greatest challenge. But as the country approaches this pivotal turning point, what ultimate lesson must the world take from South Africa's enduring struggle for true freedom and justice? What unfolds today in South Africa is not merely a domestic realignment, it is a defining moment for democratic governance across the developing world. The rise of new political forces and the evolving Julius Malema political strategy have shattered decades of electoral complacency, proving that voters will no longer accept systemic economic inequality as a permanent state of affairs. At the same time, the broader evolution of South African foreign policy demonstrates a sovereign nation asserting its rightful place on the international stage, unbowed by external pressures or historic dependencies. This struggle is about the fundamental promise of human dignity. It is about whether a constitutional democracy can truly deliver social justice to those who bore the heaviest burden of its history. As alternative visions of governance contend for the soul of the nation, the bold impact of the Julius Malema political strategy continues to challenge the political status quo, forcing every institution to re-examine its commitment to the people. True power does not belong to political elites or parliamentary halls. It remains rooted in the collective will of a resilient population striving for a just and equitable future. The road ahead will undoubtedly be fraught with complexity, yet the spirit of resistance and renewal remains undiminished. If you found this geopolitical analysis insightful, please consider liking this video, sharing it with others who value independent global perspectives, and subscribing to our channel for deep, objective coverage of world affairs. What do you believe is the most critical lesson the world can learn from South Africa's ongoing transformation? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned as we continue to analyze the forces shaping our global future.